Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this is video for chapter 1 part 2. So before this, you all dah tengok a few basic terms in statistics, and you also dah tengok what is the source of data, the type of variable, and also the scale of measurement. So in this part, we are going to look at sampling. So what is sampling? Sampling is the process of selecting a sample from a population. So sampling ini sebenarnya adalah proses macam mana kita nak pilih sampel daripada population. Kalau dalam population tu ada 1000 orang, awak hanya nak pilih 100. So there are few ways, okay, on how to select 100 from a total of 1000. So in any case, sample and the target population should be similar to one another. Sample must represent the whole population. So di sini sebenarnya bila population awak itu ada lelaki dan perempuan, so sample awak seharusnya mengandungi lelaki dan perempuan juga. Kalaulah population awak tu ada 10 different group yang berbeza, and awak nak represent ataupun awak nak buat study untuk buat conclusion about the whole population, means that you need to have a representative. Your sample should have all those subpopulation. Okay, so sampling ni very preferable when the population is large. So biasanya kita buat sampling apabila population kita terlalu besar, and bila kita nak buat study tu, kita hanya nak involve a portion of your population. So it is preferable when the population is large. So sampling in term of cost, okay, the smaller number unit involved in a sample require less time and money to evaluate. In term of time, can be evaluated more quickly than population sebab saiznya kecil. Accuracy, be able to monitor carefully and may permit careful training and supervision of data since it is small. Scope of information, be able to gather more extensive information on each unit evaluated. Reliability and feasibility. A high level of reliability can be achieved since few units are surveyed and resources can be concentrated on obtaining reliable information. So there are two types of sampling techniques. Okay, there are two major types of sampling technique. So here dia kata information obtained from the sample is used to make a conclusion about the population. Thus, sample must be selected in such a way that it will accurately represent its population. Sampling technique can be classified into two. We have random sampling technique, sometimes called probability sampling, and another one is non-random sampling technique, sometimes called non-probability sampling technique. So what are the difference? In random sampling technique, okay, it assures every unit in the population has equal chance to be selected as sample. Maksudnya di sini, kalau awak buat random sampling technique, setiap elemen, setiap orang dalam population itu, peluangnya untuk terpilih sebagai sampel adalah sama. Okay, berbeza dengan non-random, it does not give all the individual in the population equal chance of being selected. Kalau you pilih sampel orang yang you kenal, dan itu bukan random. Sebab apa? Kalau orang yang kenal je you akan jadikan respondent, dan orang yang you tak kenal, dia tak ada peluang untuk jadi sampel. So they do not have chance, okay, to be selected as sample. That is non-random. But when everybody in the population itu, peluangnya untuk terpilih adalah sama, dan itu namanya random sampling technique. Okay, it's meant to be an unbiased representation of a group. But bila kita nak buat random sampling technique, a complete and updated sampling frame must be available. So ingat lagi apa sampling frame? Okay, sampling frame is list of all. Okay, so kalau you kata you nak buat random sampling technique, you must have your sampling frame. You must have a list of all element in the population. You must have a list of all students. You must have a list of all names untuk staff. Okay, you mesti ada senarai semua orang. And senarai ni sebenarnya tak kisahlah sama ada nama, ID number, email address, nombor telefon, and etc. As long as you have a list of all element in the population. Okay, untuk non-random sampling, macam saya cakap tadi, it doesn't give all the individual in the population equal chance to be selected as sample. So, bila tak dapat nak bagi peluang yang sama kepada semua orang dalam population, your sample may or may not represent the entire population accurately. So, sampel yang awak pilih ni, kalau menggunakan non-random sampling technique, dia mungkin represent atau mungkin juga tidak menggambarkan the whole population dengan baik. And always use when the sampling frame are hard to obtain. Okay, biasanya kita guna non-random sampling technique ni bila kita tak ada senarai nama semua orang, bila kita tak ada sampling frame. So, kita tengok dulu random sampling, where every element in the population has equal chance to be selected as sample. There are 4 random sampling technique yang kita tengok. Okay, the first one kita namakan sebagai simple random sampling ataupun SRS. Okay, simple random sampling. The second one will be systematic sampling, and then we have stratified sampling, and last kali kita ada cluster sampling technique. So, bila saya kata sampling ni adalah cara untuk pilih sampel daripada population. Okay, we look at the first random sampling technique, which is simple random sampling ataupun SRS. So, normally kita pakai SRS when the population is homogeneous. Homogeneous di sini in term of characteristic. Your population itu ada ciri-ciri yang lebih kurang sama antara satu dengan yang lain. So, in order to conduct SRS, you need to get a complete sampling frame. So, apa itu sampling frame? Sampling frame is a list of all element in the population. And your sampling frame ni boleh jadi senarai nama semua orang, boleh jadi email address semua orang, boleh jadi phone number, and etc. Once you have a list of all element in the population, you can assign a unique number to each element in the population. So, unique number di sini, setiap elemen dalam population itu seharusnya ada nombor dia sendiri. Tidak boleh ada yang sama. And once you already assign a unique number to every element in the population, you can randomly choose one by one until you achieve the sample size needed. So, saya highlightkan randomly select. Okay, randomly choose one by one. Okay, kita kena pastikan cara you pilih itu adalah secara rawak, random. So, macam mana nak pilih secara random? There are few ways. You may use random number table ataupun you may generate random number from a computer. But I think cara yang paling you all familiar will be lucky draw method. So, lucky draw method ni macam mana? Okay, you dah ada sampling frame tadi and you dah senaraikan, you dah assign number kepada every element in the population. So, what you need to do now is you write down each number on a piece of paper, for example. You put all number dalam satu box, dalam satu bekas. Okay, bila you dah letak dalam bekas, you shuffle evenly and then you pilih nombor ataupun pilih kertas itu tanpa melihat ke dalam. contoh, okay, kalau you nak buat study, okay, pada dekat satu company, okay, and company ni ada a total of 1,000 employees, but you do not have time and money, okay, untuk conduct a survey yang melibatkan semua 1,000 orang. So what you want to do is you only select a portion of population untuk buat your study, untuk conduct your study. So for example, you nak pilih 100 orang daripada 1,000. Okay, ada 1,000 employee, awak hanya nak pilih 100. Population 1,000 orang, you nak pilih 100. So, you must have a complete sampling frame. You mesti ada senarai nama semua 1,000 employees dalam company tu. You assign number kepada setiap satunya. Lepas tu tulis atas kertas, masukkan dalam box and shuffle. Lepas sudah siap shuffle, you pilih 100 nombor, okay, one by one, tanpa melihat. That is SRS, Simple Random Sampling. Next, random sampling technique yang kita boleh pakai, nama dia systematic sampling. So this is a random sampling with a system where you take every case element from the sampling frame. Maksud take every case element ni maksudnya, okay, setiap orang yang ke-10 you interview. Setiap orang yang ke-100 awak interview. So you ada satu pattern. Okay, so sama juga macam SRS tadi, population has to be homogeneous. Karakteristik dalam population awak itu adalah sama. Now, how to conduct systematic sampling? So, first of all, you kena tahu berapa bilangan population ataupun elemen dalam population and berapa sample size yang you nak. Okay, sample unit must be in sequence and serially numbered. Okay, sama juga you kena number your elemen dalam population. So, lepas tu you kena find K. K tu apa? Okay, divide the population N. Kalau capital N ini represent the total number of element dalam population. Kalau N kecil tu represent sample size. Okay, so you kena cari K. K tu apa? N besar bahagi N kecil. Number of element dalam population dibahagikan dengan sample size yang you nak. So bila you dah dapat K berapa, you divide the population consists of K individual dalam setiap group. Randomly select one individual from the first group and then select every case individual thereafter. So you tengok dekat sini, randomly select one individual from the first group. Macam mana nak randomly select from the first group ni? You boleh pakai SRS. Okay, kita tengok contoh. Okay, katalah, okay, suppose there are 16 element in the population. Katalah dalam population saya hanya ada 16 orang. And I wanted to sample 4 elements. So 16 ni adalah saya punya capital N, number of element dalam population, and saya nak sample size 4. So kalau nak pakai systematic sampling, kena cari K. K tu apa? Capital N bagi small n. 16 bahagi 4, you dapat 4 juga. So, population, okay, ada 16. You divide into 4 groups. This is your first group, second group, third group, fourth group. Bilangan kumpulan mesti sama dengan N. Number of groups mesti sama dengan sample size yang you nak. Okay. Dan bilangan elemen dalam kumpulan sama dengan K. Okay, saya ulang lagi sekali. Bila you nak buat systematic sampling, you have to divide your population into groups. So, nak bahagi kepada berapa grup, bilangan grup itu mesti sama dengan bilangan sampel yang you nak. Dan bilangan elemen dalam setiap grup mesti sama dengan K. So, saya nak sampel 4, K saya 4. That's why I have 4 groups. Dalam setiap grup ada 4 elemen. So, nak buat systematic sampling, firstly, a random number between 1 to 4 is selected. You kena start dengan first group. You kena start pilih sampel daripada first group. Dalam first group ada 4 elemen, pilih satu. Tapi nak pilih satu tu kena pilih secara random. Macam mana nak pilih secara random? Boleh pakai SRS. So, tulis nombor 1, 2, 3, 4. Letak dalam bekas. Shuffle. Saya dapat nombor 3. For example, saya dapat third element dalam the first group. So, third element dalam first group will be my first sample. Tadi kata nak 4 sampel. So, siapa sampel yang kedua? Sampel yang kedua adalah tadi 3 tambah 4. 4 tu K. So, sampel kedua awak adalah... Sorry, there is something wrong with the recording. So, I just continue straight away. Tadi saya bagi contoh. Saya pilih secara random daripada the first group. Okay, dalam first group ni ada 4 elemen. Saya pilih secara random pakai SRS. Contoh, saya dapat elemen ketiga. So, elemen ketiga ini ataupun orang yang ketiga ini akan jadi saya punya first sample daripada first group. So, siapa sampel yang seterusnya? Since tadi K kita 4, so kalau the first one nombor 3, the second one will be 3 tambah 4, 7. So, elemen ketujuh dekat sini ataupun orang yang ketujuh akan jadi sampel kedua. Tambah 4 lagi orang ke-11 akan jadi sampel nombor 3. Dan orang yang ke-15 akan jadi sampel yang terakhir. So, please make sure that you understand the population ada 16 orang. Awak hanya nak 4 orang daripada 16. Dan awak nak pilih 4 orang ini secara sistematik. So, you need to divide the population into 4 groups sebab you nak 4 sampel. Setiap group ada 4 orang. Randomly select the first one using SRS. So, bagikan example. Saya bagi kat situ example-nya nombor 3. So, tambah 4 dapat elemen nombor 7 dan seterusnya lah. So, every fourth element. This is systematic sampling. Next will be stratified sampling technique. So, stratified sampling technique ni appropriate when large variation within the population occur. So, maksud large variation ni, awak nampak dalam population awak ni, ada kumpulan-kumpulan yang mempunyai karakteristik tersendiri. Okay? And awak nak kaji juga. Awak nak melihat perbezaan karakteristik ini ataupun awak nak tengok. Okay? So, you boleh pakai stratified sampling. So, dalam stratified sampling, population is divided into 2 or more mutually exclusive strata. Strata ni sebenarnya kumpulan lah. Okay, you divide your population into 2 or more mutually exclusive strata. Maksud mutually exclusive dekat sini, kumpulan-kumpulan itu tidak boleh bertindih. Maksudnya, awak bahagi kepada 3 kumpulan. Setiap orang hanya boleh masuk satu kumpulan. Dan setiap orang mesti ada kumpulan. Okay? According to some common characteristic, okay, such that unit within each strata are homogeneous, between strata are heterogeneous. Population is divided into strata where within strata, dalam kumpulan itu karakteristiknya sama, tetapi di antara kumpulan-kumpulan yang awak dah buat tu, dia berbeza-beza. Okay? Simple random sample is selected from each strata. Ini keyword untuk stratified sampling. Bila awak ada population, population itu awak pecahkan kepada kumpulan dan awak pilih sampel daripada setiap kumpulan. Okay, so stratified sample may be proportionate or disproportionate. But in our case, kita selalu pakai proportionate sampling. Lepas you dah cari sampel daripada setiap kumpulan, sample from each strata are combined into one. Okay, so dia kata dekat sini, stratification of the population is needed in order to obtain more homogeneous subgroup. Normally used when the researcher wants to highlight a specific subgroup within the population. And this also to ensure the presence of the key subgroup within the sample. Maksudnya dekat sini, awak ada satu population yang besar and awak nak pastikan setiap subgroup dalam population itu ada dalam sampel awak. Setiap subgroup itu ada wakil dalam sampel. Dan you boleh pakai stratified sampling. So in order to conduct stratified sampling, you need to divide your population into groups. Okay, based on their individual characteristic. So based on their individual characteristic ni juga, it actually depends on the study yang you nak buat. Apa yang you nak highlightkan dalam study you. So for example, I want to conduct a study and I want to highlight their faculty, for example. So if I want to highlight their faculty, so my population, student in UITM Alu Gajah, contoh. UITM KAG. Okay. Saya divide according to faculty. FPP, AD, accounting, for example. So the population is divided according to faculty, where within the groups, homogeneous, between group, heterogeneous. Okay, dalam stratified juga, lepas you dah pecahkan kepada kumpulan, you dah divide into groups, you kena randomly select sample daripada setiap kumpulan from each group. So, how many you should select from each group? So, in our case, we are going to select number of sample proportionately. Proportionately dekat sini bermaksud, kalaulah kumpulan itu bilangannya ramai ataupun kumpulan itu besar, sampel yang you akan pilih juga besar. Kalau kumpulan itu kecil, then the number of sample juga will be small. So, dia ikut ratio. Okay? So, macam mana nak kira bilangan sampel yang you kena pilih daripada setiap kumpulan? So, to calculate the sample size for each strata, kita pakai this equation. Ni sama dengan capital Ni bahagi capital N multiply with N. So, awak dah tahu N besar ni population punya bilangan, N kecil sampel punya bilangan. So, Ni dekat sini adalah bilangan sampel yang you nak cari untuk setiap group. And capital N ini pula adalah bilangan elemen dalam setiap grup tu. Okay, lepas ni saya akan tunjukkan contoh. So after that, once you have calculated how many sample you need to select from each strata, barulah you select random sample from each strata using any one of the previous method. So the easiest one will be SRS, simple random sampling. So you will select sample from each strata, okay, accordingly berapa bilangan dia, dan menggunakan SRS. Dah ada semua tu, you combine sample from each strata as one. So kita tengok contoh. Okay, this is one very simple example. So here, okay, suppose that in a company there are the following staff. So I have full-time staff, part-time staff, ada male staff, ada female staff, with a total of 180 staff. So 180 adalah capital N, bilangan elemen dalam population. So we were asked to take a sample of 40 staff. So 40 staff kat sini adalah small n, bilangan sampel yang you nak. And dia kata we were asked to take sample of 40 staff stratified according to the above categories. So dia kata dia nak stratified according to categories yang ada dekat dalam table. So apa categories yang ada? Ada full time male, ada full time female, ada part time male, ada part time female. So these are the categories yang ada. So kalaulah saya nak select sample, nak make sure that semua kategori ni ada. Saya nak buat study and nak make sure sample saya ada yang full time lelaki, ada yang full time perempuan, ada yang part time lelaki, ada yang part time perempuan. Cara yang paling baik, okay, to make sure that every subcategory sini ada dalam sampel awak adalah menggunakan stratified sampling. So that's why here, okay, I show you. Population is divided into 4 strata, which are these 4 strata. Where within strata homogeneous, between strata heterogeneous. Apa maksud within strata homogeneous? Maksudnya kumpulan saya yang pertama adalah full-time male. So dalam kumpulan itu, ciri-ciri dia apa? Mereka ini adalah full-time staff lelaki. Grup kedua, full-time female. Itu karakteristik dia. So within kumpulan homogeneous, tapi between kumpulan dia berbeza. Kumpulan pertama ni lelaki, kumpulan kedua ni perempuan. Karakteristik dia between strata berbeza. Once you have decided what are the groups, you need to select sample from each strata using SRS. Okay, jangan tinggal perkataan randomly select. Sebab kalau you pilih bukan random, itu bukan random sampling. Lepas tu kita calculate the number of sample from each strata. Kita tengok full-time male. Full-time male ada 90 orang. So, ini adalah bilangan full-time male. Okay. So, awak nak cari sampel full-time male. Bilangan orang dalam full-time male 90 dibahagi dengan jumlah keseluruhan staff yang ada di dalam company tersebut 180 orang didarabkan dengan berapa total sampel yang you nak. That's why saya buat kat sini bilangan sampel yang you perlu pilih pada kumpulan full time male adalah 90, which is this one, 90. Bahagi dengan bilangan elemen dalam population 180, didarabkan dengan number of sample that you want, 40. You dapat 20 staff daripada full time male. Daripada full time female 4 orang, part time male 2 orang, part time female 14 orang. Total dia akan jadi 40. Last sampling method, okay, under random sampling technique adalah cluster sampling. So this method is very popular because it can be applied to a large study area. Population is divided into several groups ataupun cluster where each representative of the population. Okay, dia lebih kurang macam stratified sampling. Your population is divided into groups. But here, if you notice dia kata, unit within each cluster are heterogeneous, between cluster are homogeneous. Dia terbalik dengan stratified. Okay. Kalau stratified, within homogeneous, sama karakteristik. But untuk cluster, between homogeneous, within dia heterogeneous. Dia terbalik dengan stratified. Stratified within homogeneous, cluster within heterogeneous. So apa maksud homogeneous? Homogeneous ni karakteristiknya sama. Okay, dalam kumpulan tersebut karakteristik dia sama. But heterogeneous bermaksud karakteristiknya berbeza-beza. Okay, so since within each cluster are heterogeneous and between cluster are homogeneous, a simple random sample of cluster is selected. Apa maksudnya dekat sini? Satu population divide into cluster. Tapi dia kata between cluster ni, cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, cluster 4. Between keempat-empat cluster ni dia homogeneous. Maksud homogeneous, karakteristiknya sama. So bila karakteristik sama, awak tak perlulah nak sampel semua kumpulan. Dia jadi redundant. Sebab kumpulan 1 sama dengan kumpulan 2, sama dengan kumpulan 3, sama dengan kumpulan 4. So, since you kata dia homogeneous, apa yang you perlu buat? You hanya perlu select a few cluster and sample element in the selected cluster. Okay, tolong bezakan. Kalau stratified, population divide into groups. Tapi between group heterogeneous. Maksudnya kumpulan 1 tak sama dengan kumpulan 2, tak sama dengan kumpulan 3, tak sama dengan kumpulan 4. So kalau you nak pilih sampel, sampel ini mesti represent the population. So it's not fair awak ambil kumpulan 1 je, tak ambil kumpulan 2. Sebab 1 dengan 2 lain. So that's why dalam stratified kena sampel daripada kumpulan 1, kena sampel daripada kumpulan 2, kena sampel daripada kumpulan 3, kena sampel juga daripada kumpulan 4. Itu stratified. Cluster tak payah. 1, 2, 3, 4 ni sama. Awak pilih randomly salah satu. Saya dapat kumpulan nombor 2. So 1, 3, 4 tak payah sampel. So kalau awak tengok my next point, to conduct cluster sampling, you need to specify appropriate cluster. So, your population nak divide into groups, nak divide into cluster. Macam mana you nak divide? Apa karakteristik ataupun ciri yang you nak divide ni? Apa yang you ambil kira untuk divide? Lepas tu, you need to have sampling frame for all cluster. You mesti ada senarai semua cluster. A random sample or cluster is selected using apa? Boleh suggest using SRS. Okay, once you dah select the cluster, you sample all or a portion of the unit for each selected cluster. Okay, kita contoh. Okay, kita tengok example untuk cluster sampling. For example, I want to determine household income in a city. So, satu big city, saya nak tengok household income. But I do not have time and money to interview every household in the city. So, city ni pula, dia ada blocks. Okay, dia ada pecahan-pecahan daerah, area ataupun kawasan-kawasan dia. So, saya treat each block within the city as a cluster. So, area pertama, satu cluster. Area kedua, satu cluster. Tapi semua cluster ni di bawah satu city yang sama. So, between the first block, second block, third block, and fourth block ini, mereka homogeneous. Tapi within these blocks, dia hetero. So, since setiap blocks tu sama, saya tak perlulah pergi ke empat blocks. Apa yang saya boleh buat? Randomly select a sample of cluster. Daripada 4, mungkin saya select 1. And question every household within the cluster. So, daripada 4 blocks di dalam city yang sama, saya randomly select 1 block dan sample everyone in that block. Okay, so it can be seen that here, it is easier to visit household in the same block than it is to travel to each household in a random sample to survey the annual household income. So, pastikan you boleh bezakan between stratified sampling dengan cluster sampling. I just want to highlight again, kedua-duanya divide into groups. Cuma bezanya dalam stratified, divide into groups within homogeneous between heterogeneous. Lepas tu, you kena sample daripada setiap group. Berbeza dengan cluster, divide into groups within hetero between homogeneous. Tak perlu sample semua kumpulan, just pilih beberapa kumpulan and sample all in that groups. So, these are the advantage and disadvantages, okay, untuk setiap teknik. So, apa yang saya nak highlightkan dekat sini, untuk systematic, tolong ingat this part. Okay, dia punya disadvantage. The system may interact with some hidden trait ataupun hidden pattern in the population. Stratified, selalu dia tanya advantage. And yang lain-lain tu you boleh go through lah. So, soalan selalu juga tanya apa advantages and disadvantages untuk random sampling technique ni. Okay, now we are going to look at non-random sampling technique. So, kalau dalam random sampling technique, every element in the population has equal chance to be selected as sample. Dalam non-random sampling technique, they do not have an equal chance to be sample. So, when to use non-probability sampling technique? Okay, so normally we use non-probability ataupun non-random sampling technique when the researcher aim to do a pilot study. So, if you still remember, in part 1, pilot study adalah a small scale study yang you buat before the actual fieldwork. Okay, untuk test your questionnaire biasanya. So kalau you setakat nak buat pilot study, then you boleh pakai non-probability sampling technique. Or when the sampling frame is difficult to obtain. Okay, because kalau you nak buat random sampling technique, you perlukan sampling frame. So bila you tak ada sampling frame, then you kena pakai non-random sampling. Another reason is when the researcher does not aim to generate result that will be used to create generalization. When the researcher has limited budget, time and workforce, and maybe we normally use non-probability sampling technique when the randomization is impossible, like when the population is almost limitless. So your population keep growing. So you tak dapat nak cari sampling frame. So kita boleh pakai non-random sampling technique. So there are 4 non-random sampling technique yang kita tengok dalam syllabus ni. So we have convenience sampling, quota sampling, judgmental sampling technique, and also snowball sampling. So we look at the first one, convenience sampling. So convenience sampling technique is probably the most common of all sampling technique. Ini adalah sampling technique yang paling common sekali. Okay, so convenience sampling technique ni not normally representative of the population. Maksudnya di sini, kalau awak pilih sampel secara convenience sampling, sampel awak itu not necessarily represent the population. Okay, mungkin awak pilih sampel ini tidak dapat menggambarkan dengan baik population yang sebenar. Samples are selected because of their accessibility and proximity to the researcher. Dalam convenience sampling technique, kita pilih sampel because of their accessibility. Okay, subject are chosen simply because they are the easiest to recruit, and the researcher did not consider selecting subjects that are representative of the entire population. Okay, so you pilih sampel simply because dia senang. Okay, and kita tak ada intention sangat pun bila pilih responden ni ataupun bila pilih sampel ini mestilah 100% representative of the population. You tak kisah sangat about that. So memang it would be ideal to test the entire population, but in most cases the population is just too large that it is impossible to include every individual. So biasanya population awak besar, okay, especially those yang macam survey yang you nak buat big scale, okay. So sometimes it is impossible to include every individual ataupun every element in the population. So kita pakai sampling lah, okay, sample. So using this method, we select a sample where suitability is the primary consideration. Okay, so antara contoh-contoh convenience sampling, okay, you nak buat survey and the first 100 customer to enter a department store, you ambil as sample. Ataupun you buat convenience sampling ni macam mana? By using student volunteers as subject research. Okay, you pergi dekat satu area and then you cakap, I'm conducting a survey, I need 100 volunteers. So without having a complete sampling frame, you simply ask for volunteers. So itu adalah contoh convenience sampling technique. Next one is quota sampling. So you select people non-randomly according to some fixed or given quota to fill from specific subgroup of the population. And the procedure is similar to convenience sampling, except that the number allocated for each group of the respondent with specific characteristics are based on population statistics. So sama macam tadi, convenience sampling technique, kita pilih simply because they are the easiest one. But now, you add quota dalam pemilihan responden awak. Contoh tadi, saya kata convenience sampling adalah student volunteers. Awak buat satu study, awak cakap, I need 100 volunteers. But then, awak spesifikkan. You kata, I want 70% female respondent. And another 30% is male. So, you kata, I want 100 volunteers. That is convenient sampling. But bila you add, you kata you nak 70 female, 30 male, dia jadi quota sampling technique. The interviewer has the flexibility to choose whoever he wants, provided that he abides the specification, which could be age group, gender, education, race, and etc. Maksudnya di sini, researcher ataupun interviewer tak kisah dia nak pilih siapa pun. Just syarat dia memenuhi kriteria yang dia nak. For example, I want to conduct a study dekat student business. So, bila you kata you nak pilih 100 volunteer, volunteer ini mestilah student business. Kalau you kata you nak 70 perempuan, 30 lelaki, 70 perempuan itu mesti student business, 30 lelaki juga mesti student business. Okay? Quota sampling is somewhat similar to stratified sampling. Okay, lebih kurang stratified sampling in that similar units are grouped together. Okay, however, it differs in how the units are selected. So, dia kata quota sampling ini lebih kurang stratified sampling. Sebab apa? Awak divide kepada kumpulan. You nak daripada each group. Awak nak daripada lelaki dan juga perempuan. Stratified pun sama juga macam tu. Okay, cuma bezanya dengan stratified sampling select randomly, quota sampling it is usually left up to the interviewer to decide who to sample. Okay. Next one is judgmental sampling technique. So this one is another non-random sampling technique, also known as purposive ataupun authoritative sampling, where the researcher believe that some subject are more fit for the research as compared to other individuals. Okay, dalam judgmental sampling technique ini, researcher percaya yang ada orang-orang tertentu yang paling baik untuk involve dalam study dia. Okay, researchers select unit to be sampled based on their knowledge, professional judgment, and prior experience. Okay, so researcher decide siapa sampel yang dia nak based on dia punya knowledge, based on dia punya experience, based on dia punya judgment. Okay, so dia kata kat sini involve nothing but purposely handpick individual. Okay, so it's an extension to convenience sampling, usually used when a limited number of individuals possess that trait of interest. Biasanya kita guna method ini apabila sampel yang awak nak itu very limited. Okay, so saya bagi example dekat dalam ni. In a study where a researcher wants to know what it takes to graduate with CGPA 4.0. A researcher conduct study, dia nak tahu, okay, apa yang perlu untuk dapat 4.0. So, siapa yang paling layak untuk bagi tahu the researcher macam mana dapat 4.0? So, the only people who can give the researcher first-hand advice adalah mereka yang dapat 4 flat. Sebab awak nak tanya, apa yang kita perlu buat untuk dapat 4 flat? If awak tanya someone, dia bagi tips. Okay, dia kata you mesti study 8 hours per day, you must eat healthy, you must wake up at 5 and etc. Tapi bila kita tanya CGPA, okay, what is your CGPA? My CGPA is 2.0. So sampel tu CGPA dia 2.0. Tapi dia bagi tips macam mana dapat 4 flat. tak sesuai lah. So, siapa orang yang paling sesuai untuk bagi tips macam mana dapat 4.0? Student yang dapat 4.0. Okay? So, that is judgmental. The researcher dah tahu dah dekat dalam kepala dia siapa yang dia nak sample. So, dia tinggal handpick saja. Okay? Last non-random sampling technique adalah snowball sampling. So, snowball sampling ini is used when the desired sample characteristic or trait is rare or hard to find or it's very limited. Awak nak buat satu study but the population is very small or the population is very hard to find. Okay? So, kita pakai snowball sampling technique. So, macam mana snowball sampling ni? Researcher, okay, ask help from a respondent in identifying the population under study. So, dalam snowball ni, cara dia macam chain referral. Okay, begin by identifying someone who meets the criteria. Lepas tu, you tanya dia, you ask them to recommend another potential subject. And you ulang benda ni. Okay, so contohlah, kalau you nak conduct a study about a certain rare disease. For example, how people with albino disease, okay, dia socialize. Okay, macam mana orang yang berpenyakit albino ini dia socialize dengan masyarakat. Okay, so nak cari orang yang berpenyakit albino ini sendiri dah sangat-sangat susah. So, it's quite impossible for you to pick them randomly. So, apa yang kita boleh buat? Kita cari the first one, sample yang pertama. That is the hardest one, the hardest part. You cari satu orang yang mempunyai kriteria yang you nak. Contoh dalam kes saya bagi ni, someone with albino. You interview dia. Lepas dah habis interview, you ask him to recommend. Tanya dia, siapa lagi yang ada penyakit yang sama? Sebab kita percaya, okay, those yang ada rare disease ini, mereka ni ada support group. Ataupun bila dia pergi check up, bila dia jumpa doktor, dia ada patient ataupun someone yang mempunyai penyakit yang sama dengan dia. So, maybe dia boleh recommend. Okay? Selain daripada sebab disease ataupun rare karakteristik ni, mungkin juga benda yang awak nak cari ataupun karakter yang awak nak ni sensitif. Contoh, you nak tanya macam mana penerimaan masyarakat terhadap orang yang berstatus anak luar taraf. Okay? Perkara ni adalah antara perkara yang sensitif. Kita tak boleh pergi dekat mall, kita tanya, okay, saya nak interview orang yang saya nak interview anak luar taraf. Siapa kat sini yang luar taraf, saya nak interview. So, bukan semua orang akan willingly untuk admit yang dia anak luar taraf. So, benda ni, okay, cara yang baik adalah guna snowball sampling technique. Alright? So, there are a few more example yang saya bagi dekat bawah tu. Awak nak study pasal ex-prisoner. Okay, bekas banduan. Tak ada awak dah tanya general orang nak mengaku yang dia bekas banduan. So, kita kena guna snowball sampling lah untuk dapatkan sampel yang memenuhi karakteristik yang kita nak. So, these are the advantage and disadvantages. So, basically, advantage untuk non-random sampling ni, dia easy, dia murah, and least time consuming as compared to random sampling. Okay, disadvantage dia not representative of the population. Okay, and kesemuanya doesn't allow generalization about the whole population. Okay, untuk advantage and disadvantages ini awak tak perlulah hafal banyak-banyak. You dapat hafal 2, I think it's more than enough. Alright, so macam saya cakap tadi, advantages sebenarnya untuk convenience sampling, untuk quota sampling, judgmental sampling and also snowball sampling ni, awak boleh cakap dia easy as compared to random sampling, it's cheaper as compared to random sampling, and it will be less time consuming as compared to random sampling technique. But the disadvantages will be not a representative of the population and it doesn't allow generalization. Cukup lah. Okay, yang lain-lain ni sebenarnya adalah untuk your additional knowledge ya. Okay, so I think itu saja. Okay, untuk part 2. So sama juga. Okay, apa yang saya boleh explain dalam slide is very short. But if you need extra explanation, please do not hesitate to text me, or maybe we can set up a Google Meet session untuk saya explain more. Right? So thank you.